Okay, let's talk about heme synthesis. Heme synthesis is one of my top 5 favorite subjects to talk about, so this will be a great lecture. Let's go over some of the basics. Before we dive into the actual pathway, because there's a nice biochemical pathway that we can follow, and there's some disorders, some classic disorders that are common, and we'll see them, and we'll talk about how they affect that pathway. But let's talk about the basics of heme synthesis. So to begin, we're going to start and end in the mitochondria. This is a nice way to remember it because you start and end in the same place. However, we are going to venture into the depths of the cytoplasm. We're going to venture into the cytoplasm. So we're also going to have a rate limiting step. The rate limiting step is going to be the enzyme where we're going to have reactants that get turned into products. And here's our enzyme here. So our rate limiting step is going to happen very early on in heme synthesis. And we'll talk about that once we hit the pathway. But realize that we have one step that's really going to be our rate limiting step. So let's actually just dive head first into the pathway then. We're going to have two molecules that we're going to need to start out. We're going to need a molecule of succinyl-CoA and one molecule of glycine. This succinyl-CoA is going to come from the TCA cycle. If you remember the TCA cycle, succinyl-choline or succinyl-CoA is going to be one of the products of the TCA cycle. You'll also have an amino acid glycine. These two are going to combine to form one molecule of ALA. What is ALA? Well, it's going to be amino avalinic acid. And the enzyme that's going to synthesize this reaction is going to be ALA synthase. ALA synthase for shorthand. And this is going to be our rate limiting step. Alright, so remember I said that we're going to start out in the mitochondria. So we're going to be in the mitochondria. Now, the mitochondria of where? I'm going to expand on this a little bit. Heme synthesis is primarily going to take place in two places, the bone marrow and the liver. Okay, heme synthesis is primarily going to happen in the liver because your cytochromes, remember your P450 system, they're going to require some heme for their synthesis for the cytochrome systems. So that makes sense that we have some heme synthesis pathway going on in the liver. Bone marrows need heme synthesis because red blood cells need heme. So we're going to need to synthesize some heme, and that's why we see it in the bone marrow. We're going to see it in the bone marrow and the liver. We're going to start out by taking a molecule of succinyl-CoA and a molecule of glycine, combining it through the rate limiting step into ALA. ALA stands for amino avalinic acid, and we're going to take the ALA synthase enzyme to take this. This is an important thing to remember. Not only remember the reactants, but remember the rate limiting step. Okay, that's a top five thing to remember from this whole lecture. So I'm glad we got it out of the way right now. ALA is what we're dealing with right now. Next, we're going to combine two molecules of ALA. So we'll take two molecules of ALA. We're going to move them to the cytosol. So we're going to move it outside of the mitochondria. And what we're going to do is we're going to need an enzyme. This enzyme has multiple names. I'll leave it in white. So we're going to have porphobilinogen synthase. So porphobilinogen synthase also can be called ALA dehydrogenase. And I'm going to shorthand that to ALA dehydrogenase. Same thing, same enzyme, can be called two different things: ALA dehydrogenase or porphobilinogen synthase. So what are we going to create? Well, this name, I like this name better because it tells us what we're actually going to create. We're going to synthesize, oops, pen just kind of whacked out there. Porphobilinogen. We're going to create a molecule of porphobilinogen. So remember, we take two molecules to form one ALA. We take two ALAs, move them to the cytosol, using this enzyme to create a porphobilinogen. Next, we're going to need four. We're going to need four porphobilinogens. We're going to combine those four into uroporphyrinogen 3 molecule. Now, we're going to need an enzyme. Let's see if I can fit it up here. This is another enzyme, kind of like this one right here, that had two names. So I'm going to write them both out. I like the one that I'm going to circle. Uroporphyrinogen 3 synthase. Uroporphyrinogen 3 synthase. Why do I like it? It's because we're synthesizing synthase, a uroporphyrinogen 3 molecule. However, it can also be called a porphobilinogen deaminase. So it can also be called a porphobilinogen deaminase. We're going to take four molecules of porphobilinogen. We're going to combine them into one molecule of uroporphyrinogen 3. Next, we're going to modify it a little bit, which, remember, we're still in the cytosol. We're still outside of the mitochondria in that cell. We're going to need an enzyme. Decarboxylase. Uroporphyrinogen 3 decarboxylase enzyme. All these names, they all kind of run together if you say it long enough. And this enzyme is going to create a coporphyrinogen molecule. Now, this coporphyrinogen is going to travel back into the mitochondria. So remember, we are in the mitochondria to begin with. We left to venture into the cytosol. Now we're going to venture back into the mitochondria. Now we're going to create an important molecule, a protoporphyrin. So this protoporphyrin is going to be made through the enzyme oxidase. Coproporphyrinogen oxidase. Okay, not that important. However, now we have a molecule of protoporphyrin. This protoporphyrin is our last step before we get to heme. That is our goal. Remember, this is the heme synthesis pathway. So here's our heme, here's our protoporphyrin. So what do we need? We need the all-important enzyme ferroketolase, the ferroketolase enzyme. And for this, ferro, think we're going to need some ferrous molecules, so some iron in there. And there we go. Okay, so our ferroketolase, we're going to need to throw in some iron in there, and then we'll get our heme molecule. Okay, this heme molecule, I'm just going to draw it in red, is going to feed back and inhibit this. We're going to have a classic feedback loop. We're going to negatively feed back. So once we synthesize some heme, this heme will feed back into our rate limiting step. It'll say, hey, you don't need to work as hard. We already have some heme, and it'll inhibit. So that's our classic negative feedback inhibition loop. So our end product heme will feed back. That's an important point. Now, we also have some disorders. So here's the classic pathway. We take a molecule of succinyl-CoA, molecule of glycine. We form ALA. We need two ALAs to form a porphobinogen. So porphobinogen. I think I spelled that wrong. Just doesn't look right. Porphobinogen. My apologies. Good thing I went back over. It forms a molecule of porphobinogen. Porphobinogen. Okay, tongue twisted. 4 molecules of porphobinogen to create a uroporphyrinogen 3. You're going to use some more enzymes to eventually convert it into a heme. Now we're going to talk about some disorders, about what happens when you inhibit some of these enzymes. So the enzymes I circled, they're also known as, in quotation marks, we have the basic pathway. Just notice here that we have cytosol and mitochondria. We originally started in the mitochondria, went to the cytosol, we ventured back into the mitochondria. Now let's talk about lead poisoning. Lead poisoning is going to be a good one. So, how do you typically present with lead poisoning? Well, it's either going to be somebody with a factory worker. They're either going to tell you they're suspected of lead poisoning. They're either going to be a factory worker, or they're going to be a little kid who eats paint. Remember, old houses have lead paint, and if there's little like lead paint chips, kids love to put stuff in their mouth. So that could be one. A little kid who had been noticing, the parents noticed that this kid ate some paint, and they live in an older house. So they're either going to tell you lead poisoning, or these are some presentations that they could clue you in to suspect some lead poisoning. So what are you going to get with lead poisoning? You're going to get anemia. Now, why do you get anemia? Well, let's go back to our pathway picture and let's mark it up a little more. So lead poisoning is going to inhibit 2 main steps. We're going to inhibit here at the ALA dehydrogenase enzyme, or we're going to inhibit the ferroketolase enzyme. So there's 2 different steps, and I'm going to take the shorthand, so it can either be ferroketolase or ALA dehydrogenase enzymes. So if we inhibit this, lead is going to inhibit these 2 enzymes. So what will we have if we inhibit these 2 enzymes? We're going to have a buildup of ALA in the system, and we're also going to have a buildup of protoporphyrin in the system, because we can't convert that protoporphyrin into the final step of heme. Then also we're going to have a buildup of ALA because we can't convert it into porphobinogen. I'm struggling with that word today. So we're going to have a buildup of those 2 products. We're not able to correctly synthesize heme. That's why we get our anemia. We're not able to synthesize heme correctly, so we're going to get that anemia. But so lead poisoning, ferroketolase is going to be your big one. If I was to write a test question, I would write it about ferroketolase. I've encountered that many times. Now let's talk about some more diseases. There's going to be the 3 diseases, and we just covered lead poisoning, so we have 2 more to talk about. Let's quickly go over the porphyrias. Porphyrias are simply heme synthesis disorders that are not due to the lead toxin. Heme synthesis disorders due to defective or deficient enzymes. And there's going to be 2 of them that we're going to talk about. These are the 2 main ones. These will show up in any questions regarding the heme pathway that you will encounter. So you have AIP, also known as acute intermittent porphyria, AIP. You also have PCT. Now PCT is going to be more common. It's also going to be a better test question. If I was to remember one of these, I would remember both. I would, but I would remember PCT over AIP, and that's because it has unique characteristics to it, and I will go over that second. However, let's first begin our discussion with AIP. Now, AIP is going to be a deficiency or a mutation in uroporphyrin 3 synthase enzyme. So let's take a look back. The uroporphyrin synthase enzyme. Where are we? We're up here. Okay, we're missing this enzyme. It's also known by this name as well. However, what we're going to have is we're going to have a buildup. We're going to have a buildup of this porphobilinogen molecule. We're not able to convert it into its proper pathway, into its heme. So you're going to have a buildup of this porphobilinogen. Also, you'll have a little bit of a buildup of ALA because you're going to have so much porphobilinogen that you're going to have an ALA buildup as well. So, you're going to have a buildup of ALA, and you're also going to have a buildup of porphobilinogen. Okay, what happens? You have all this ALA and all this porphobilinogen in your bloodstream. It'll eventually go to your kidneys to get removed from the body, and this stuff will stain your urine. So your urine, you're going to have a lot of ALA and porphobilinogen in your urine. These stain your urine dark red. So if a parent comes in, they say their child is urinating, and in their diaper you see a dark red substance, you need to be thinking, is it possibly a heme disorder? Could be a few other things, like a nephritic disease, except that would be more of like a bright red. However, you could see a darker red, a dark wine-stained color. You need to be cluing into, could it be an acute intermittent porphyria? Okay, next we've got the other type of porphyria. Dark red would be a top 10 thing to remember from this lecture. But like I said, if you had to remember just one of these, I would remember PCT. Yes, it is more common. However, it's got a really cool feature. Let's talk about it. So we had a deficient enzyme over here. We have a deficient enzyme for this disorder as well. It's going to be a different enzyme. Uroporphyrin decarboxylase. Again, let's try and figure out where in the pathway we have a problem. Before, we had a problem up here with this enzyme. Now we're going to have a problem with this enzyme. Now, when you can't convert uroporphyrin 3 into coporphyrin, you're going to have a buildup of this uroporphyrin 3. This is a unique molecule. So you're going to have a buildup. Let's fill in the blanks. Buildup. Okay, the uroporphyrin 3 buildup. So what is unique about this? Well, yes, again, like over here, when you have so much of this molecule in the bloodstream, your body will want to get rid of it. It'll go to the urine, and it will stain your urine a color. Instead of being dark, kind of wine-colored, red wine-colored, might I add, it's going to be a tea-colored. It's going to be described in the question prompt as a tea-colored, so it's kind of that yellowish-brown, kind of tea-colored appearance. Now, what I've been kind of harping over is it has a unique characteristic. Yes, it is kind of cool that it's tea-colored. However, this uroporphyrin 3 is a photoactive molecule, meaning UV light, so light from the sun, this molecule will absorb it. If you have a lot of uroporphyrin in your body, because it builds up, it'll go to your bloodstream, it'll distribute to tissues. So you'll have a whole bunch of this uroporphyrin 3 in your tissues, so such as underneath your skin. You're going to be exposed to UV light, so you walk outside in the sun, and you're going to get blisters because this uroporphyrin 3 is going to absorb the UV light. typically, like sunscreen absorbs UV light and protects your skin. You don't want to absorb a lot of UV light because that's how you get sunburned. It causes damage. But this uroporphyrin 3 loves UV light. It's going to absorb it. You're going to get UV blisters. So if I was to write a question, it would be something about a patient presents to your office with blistering on their hands and their face in sun-exposed areas. They have blisters in sun-exposed areas. They notice that whenever they go out in the sun, they get blisters, and especially blisters on areas that haven't been covered up with clothing or hats. So that should start tipping you off into PCT. You ask, do you ever get bouts where your urine is often tea-colored? And they say, why, yes. And then you can say, oh, you have a uroporphyrin decarboxylase deficiency. You can sound smart. So that's going to be PCT. Next, let's talk about our last topic here. Let's quickly go over drugs and alcohol on heme synthesis. How does this affect heme synth? I don't know. You tell me. Well, actually, I'll tell you because I do know. So you have alcohol. I have a great video on this, but alcohol will induce or activate your cytochrome. Okay, I can do better than that. That's not a C. Cytochrome P450 system. Your cytochrome P450 system. That's going to help metabolize the alcohol. And if you're a chronic alcoholic, you're going to have a whole bunch of cytochrome P450 in your liver. Wait, where have we seen that before? Can we synthesize some material? P450 system in the liver. That's why we get heme synthesis in the liver. Our cytochrome P450 system will convert alcohol into inactive metabolites. We're gonna take that ethanol and we're gonna metabolize it through the P450 system. Now, also drugs. Certain drugs induce. I'm not going to list them all. There's a whole list of drugs that induce your cytochrome P450 system in your liver to metabolize stuff. Okay, so you have this cytochrome P450 system that gets activated. Now, you need cytochromes to build your cytochrome P450 system. Cytochromes. You're going to increase cytochrome demand because you need a whole bunch of cytochromes to build your P450 system because you're drinking a lot of alcohol or you're taking drugs that induce this system. So you're going to need higher cytochrome demand. Now, since cytochromes need heme, cytochromes need heme. So you're going to start making a whole bunch of heme synthesis. So when you make a whole bunch of heme synthesis and you have one of these disorders that we just talked about, either AIP or PCT, you go through your pathway. You start with your stuff over here. Yeah, we're going to make some heme. We're going to make some heme. Oh, we get to an enzyme deficiency. So we're going to have an increased buildup of these products. So when you take drugs that induce your cytochrome P450 system, you'll want to make heme. But you start making heme and you get stuck. So you're going to increase the concentration of these intermediates of the heme synthesis pathway. If you have PCT, you're going to get a whole bunch of this uroporphyrin 3. Remember, that's the photoactive molecule. So you're going to get increased skin blistering, especially when exposed to the light. If you have the AIP, you're going to have a dark red urine because you're going to try and make a whole bunch of heme because you want to make cytochrome P450s, but you can't because you're missing this enzyme. Also, notice that since you can't make a whole bunch of heme normally negatively feeds back onto ALA synthase. However, if you have one of these disorders, either a lead toxicity, AIP, or PCT, you're not able to make as much heme. Okay? So that should make sense. If you have one of those disorders, you can't make as much heme because you're either inhibiting these enzymes or you have a deficiency or mutation in these enzymes. So you have decreased heme. If you have decreased heme, you can't feed back. You can't inhibit this as much. So your system this rate limiting step will say, okay, we'll keep going. Since we don't have much heme, let's keep going. And you keep going, and you keep getting a buildup of these products. So that's another way that you can exacerbate your symptoms, is the loss of negative feedback. So we've talked about how drugs and alcohol affect heme synthesis. Alcohol and drugs induce your cytochrome P450 system. You're going to need to make more cytochrome P450 system enzymes. To do that, you're going to need heme, and you try and keep making heme, but you can't because you're missing those enzymes. So hopefully this is making a little sense now. This is one of my top favorite subjects to lecture about. Why? It's because there's some good clinical tie-ins. There's a great pathway that you can follow. There's some good disorders. And also there's really good test questions. There seems to always be test questions on boards, on exams in undergraduate and graduate school at every level. They love this pathway. So if you have any questions, be sure to ask me. I always enjoy answering questions, so if you have anything, let me help you. Otherwise, I really enjoy hearing your comments, whether they're positive, whether they're negative. Let me know what I can do better. Let me know if it helped you or not. If you did find this video useful or you learned something, please click like. Helps build up my ego personally. And then also subscribe for more great videos if you want to stick with me again in the future. Thank you very much, and thank you for giving me your time today.